or any omissions in their tax declarations.
The major reason is because when a business is registered, it automatically gets onto the grid of Uganda Revenue Authority or the local council tax system, and in some cases it is both. The taxation mechanism has also been criticized on tax inequity issues, with well-to-do firms benefiting from various tax incentives such as the 10-year exemptions granted to agro-processing firms, thus further eroding the progressiveness of the income tax structure. As a consequence, tax incentives are enjoyed by foreigners who take time to study the tax laws and understand the benefits enclosed. With the economy dominated by informal businesses and operated by people who are not well versed with the tax policies, the poor are paying just like the rich, and in some instances, the rich successfully maneuver and avoid paying taxes, leaving a huge tax burden on the poor, which is bad for the growth of the economy. More so, the practice violates the principle of tax justice. Some Ugandans have even urged the government to eliminate tax exemptions and incentives given to investors, describing them as enemies of economic growth.
In a special way, we want to thank those taxpayers who have continuously fulfilled their obligations amidst this impact of COVID-19, and it's because of your commitment to meet the tax obligations that we've been able to register a positive revenue performance in the first 3 months of this financial year. We appreciate you and commend you for that.
And this is the Limelight. Hello and good evening and welcome to this segment. It is the Limelight and my name is Tusime Apollo. And Ugandans are naturally hardworking people who love to start businesses. However, amongst the many businesses started, a few managed to go the whole distance to celebrate their first birthday. The challenge mainly lies with the support system from government or their immediate families. But partly, the high taxes slapped on businesses in infancy stages exacerbate the whole bad situation. Indeed, some Ugandans lack entrepreneurship and managerial skills to successfully run businesses. Economists have severally argued that tax collections would be much higher if there was a fair taxation mechanism that dispenses equity, fairness in tax assessments, and an empowered taxpayer community, as well as the real benefit from the taxes paid. A 2019 study by Economic Policy Research Center showed a high level of discretion in Uganda's capital income tax system. In this regard, there are differences in effective average tax rates driven by a mix of tax incentives, tax discrimination, and preferential treatment. The study also found out that domestic investors pay more taxes than multinationals. The study further revealed discretion in granting preferential corporate income tax rates in Uganda. As a result, some companies have been granted special capital allowances for specific assets and tax holidays. These policy actions present severe challenges, key of which is the complexity in tax administration, obscurity in real effects of tax burden, and a sizable tax revenue loss. Furthermore, tax incentives like tax holidays produce tax avoidance strategies and sustainability lower compliance across taxpayers. At this point, I bring in my guest, who is Mr. Vincent Seruma. Mr. Vincent Seruma is a commissioner, Public and Corporate Affairs at Uganda Revenue Authority, the sole agency that is mandated with the collection, assessment of taxes in Uganda. Mr. Vincent Seruma holds a master's degree in organizational psychology, and he has more than 16-year experience at Uganda Revenue Authority, serving and working on several projects and assignments. You are live on Sol TV. I'm happy to host you this evening, and luckily we are in a tax appreciation month. Please, first and foremost, talk about the tax appreciation month.
Thank you very much, Apollo, for the opportunity you've given me. And of course, I also want to thank you for the rather extensive research that you do on the subject of taxation. I think that is commendable from you. Indeed, it is true that we are in a period of appreciating our taxpayers. This is an annual activity that we always do in the month of September. But given the current dispensation, we had to make some amendments to make sure that we start it in the month of October. And this time around, it will be a season running from October up to mid-December. This year, the taxpayers' appreciation will take a wider perspective and will focus on the theme of celebrating the taxpayers of Uganda. And the tagline is developing Uganda together. The reason why we took on this new perspective is to try and extend the perspective of looking at taxpayers, particularly looking at who are the people who are making the contribution in tax payment across the country. And this is because sometimes we get the perspective that the responsibility to pay taxes in some areas and not in others. So we will now focus on looking for the taxpayers at the district level across the country, focusing on the top 10 who have complied and met their obligations, at least to fulfill our minimum requirements. What we would like to see is that the responsibility to pay taxes is well appreciated across the country, but also giving an opportunity to know who are the key contributors to their tax paying within at least their communities. And that's very important in driving Ugandans as we make efforts to cultivate a tax-paying culture within the Ugandan citizen.
Mr. Seruma, first and foremost, from your experience, and of course all those 16 years in this business, please, how can you describe the attitude of Ugandans towards paying taxes?
Thank you very much, Apollo. We have come a long way in terms of the attitude that Ugandans have for paying taxes. I remember my first years in the URA in the late 1990s when I joined, about 1999. My first area of deployment was in the east. At that time, I remember you would drive from Mbale to a border area called Ruakaka, and along that road you would arrest not less than 20 minibuses, all carrying smuggled goods. This was the lifestyle, it was the norm, and even the people within that community did not even find it acceptable that their goods should be stopped or they should be stopped from smuggling. Now that's no longer the case, and I must commend Ugandans. To date as we speak, there is a much better appreciation by Ugandans on the need to pay taxes. That notwithstanding though, we still have variations within the different segments of our taxpayers. Within the large taxpayers, there is a much better attitude and appreciation of the responsibility to pay tax. And of course, there are variations within the small and medium taxpayers. Of course, for some, they will pay, they will comply, as long as URA keeps an eye on them. And if not, they would rather take the shortcut to paying taxes. That's why we are making efforts to approach this from a different perspective. For those who are complying very well, we are extending preferential services, including the very activity I've just talked about of appreciating. For those who do not comply and want to make shortcuts, first of all, we educate, and if they become insistent, we indicate that probably that's not the preferred choice, and of course we can go the long way in implementing all other instruments. For those who are in schools, we are now implementing the schools outreach program of making sure that the tax education culture, tax paying culture can be nurtured even while somebody is in school, and that is part of our responsibility to achieve or to drive.
Okay. We would wish to know from you, Mr. Seruma, is URA really concerned about businesses that start and eventually collapse, like I said in my introductory statements?
An equal partner and stakeholder in making sure that businesses survive. We do not celebrate the death of any business, because then would be, if we are to be nurturers, then it would be very terrible nurturers. We have actually taken on the mindset of a farmer as opposed to the mindset of a hunter, and I will explain. In the past, we used to look at our business as collectors. If you realize, and probably you've been following the way we approach business of late, we are actually approaching tax administration with the mindset of a farmer, meaning that we have initiatives that are geared towards making sure we look after the business, we nurture, we water, and we use different tools and channels. I'll give you an example. Part of our new approach is making sure that we can actually provide business development seminars, business development trainings. And this, if you've been following, every time we have, especially during the year or during the taxpayers appreciation, we actually run seminars where we invite seasoned business people to come and share their experiences. If you remember last year, we actually insisted and brought in Ugandans who have survived, and they had their story. If I remember very well, we had businesses like Maganjo Millers. We had business people like Kentucky. The idea behind this was to try and get this story understood by the bigger business community. How did a business like a Maganjo start? How has Maganjo been able to move from mere sale of posho to now being a person who is actually making cornflakes? So that's the kind of perspective that we are actually pursuing, and we actually take several initiatives. You also see the way we have approached the ongoing challenge with the COVID. I think we've exercised a lot of administrative flexibility in terms of allowing businesses to structure their tax payment obligations in accordance with the circumstances that are prevailing. So we actually make deliberate efforts in making sure that we can actually support. If you also realize this year and last year, we even made discussions on making Ugandans to understand where are the opportunities for doing business, including making them appreciate that there are things which are changing within the business environment, and that's part of our responsibility, particularly in making sure that Ugandans don't have a local outlook, they can actually have a much wider regional and probably continental outlook. So that's how we approach business of late, and I believe it has also been seen by the support that has been going on during this COVID, that we've been running a lot of online webinars, and I must appreciate Ugandans who have actually subscribed to many of these webinars. They are actually oversubscribed too, and that's how we feel we would like to approach our business, as farmers and not hunters. Thank you.
Mentality of farmers, not hunters. But again, there is a very sensitive process of assessment, assessing the taxpayers. That process, there has been many complaints going around that particular process of assessing taxpayers on what they must pay. And I would like you to throw some light on how that process has evolved and where we are now. Is the assessment process fair to the taxpayers today?
Apollo, first of all, the number one person who is responsible to make the assessment is the taxpayer. And I think that's a very major change that URA made a few years ago. It is now the responsibility of the taxpayer to put together his tax accounts, do a self-assessment, and file. If what he has done is correct, URA will accept it and he will make a payment. By the way, even if the assessment is not correct, you will be allowed to proceed and make a payment. We will then only come out and say, yes, you made your own self-assessment, you even paid. But wait a bit, was this the right assessment that you made? That's when we come back. First and foremost, the responsibility is for the taxpayer. Secondly, any tax assessment is based on information. And that's where the challenge has been, that a lot of times taxpayers may file but probably may leave out some information. On our part, we may have additional information that we have in our system. I can tell you that any taxpayer, for example, when you make a sale, your sale will become an expense to the other person who bought. You may not declare that sale, but the other person will declare that as an expense. Now, if you didn't declare that sale of 10 million, and the other person declares it as an expense, as URA will be tracing that information, and therefore will come back to you and say, we saw the other person declare this as an expense, but for you did not declare this as a sale. So then there will become issues of discrepancies. Now, what brings the settlement in here is that the taxpayer will be under obligation to provide proof that either that sale happened or did not happen. Now, because of some of these issues, that's why we have tried to introduce new initiatives like the digital tracking solution, or people what called the tax stamp, and then the electronic physical invoicing and receipting, to make sure that the information that the taxpayer has is with URA as well at the same time. However, if the assessment made for you, either for import duty or local domestic tax, is not fair, there is still a process where you can appeal, you can object. Within 45 days of the assessment, you can object, and we review your objection. And again, I must emphasize, the objection review will be based on evidence, will be based on the records that you will furnish us with, or we may ask, or the gaps that may exist. If we come back to you and still hold our tax position or make amends, and you still not feel satisfied, the taxpayer still has a window to appeal to the Tax Appeals Tribunal within 30 days. The TAT, for matters of objectivity, will examine your appeal, and if it finds that URA is not fair, will rule in the favor of the taxpayer, or make adjustment to that position, or rule in favor of URA. Likewise, if the TAT decided in favor of URA and the taxpayer is not convinced, he still has another opportunity to appeal the matter in the court, in the High Court, to make sure that the matter can be heard, still again within 30 days. But along that process, other than pursuing that, the taxpayer also has an opportunity to seek alternative dispute resolution. And I must say that our current dispensation is to make sure that we can explore alternative tax dispute resolution where we are able to arrive at amicable settlements. But remember, any tax settlement, however amicable it will be based on facts and evidence. And that's what makes the issue of information and records very essential in this process.
about the tax appeals tribunal and the High Court and all of that. How effective are they, or have they been since you established this process of the tax appeals tribunal?
Well, I must say that since the tax appeals tribunal was set up, I think a lot of first of all, what the TAT has brought is objectivity. It means URA is not the alpha and omega in dealing with the tax matter. But also introducing another level beyond the TAT is the High Court. So for me, I believe this process has brought in a bit of objectivity in addressing the matter. Of course, there are times when we as URA, our position, the original position, has been upheld at all the levels. But there are also instances when we are not right. And TAT or the TAT or the High Court has made a different decision, and we've taken it in good faith. So for me, that window for another independent eye, for me, is a good addition to the tax system.
Sensitive process or idea in around taxation. We are talking about the tax incentives and tax holidays. Who really qualifies for tax holidays? Because there has been talk, there has been arguments and actually complaints that foreigners enjoy tax holidays when actually domestic investors do not.
Thank you very much. I am glad you've raised that issue, and I hope I will use this opportunity to demystify the myth around that belief. First and foremost, the whole matter of tax incentives and tax holidays is approached from the strategic perspectives or the strategic direction that the country seeks to pursue. If there are certainly there's a certain strategic direction that the country seeks to achieve, they will look at, if we are to get there as a country, what are the essential issues we must look at from the tax policy point of view. I can give you an example. The issue of energy has been a critical matter, and therefore when you look at electricity generation and related area issues to do with the solar energy, clean energy, so there's a lot of tax exemptions and maybe incentives within that regime. Look at agriculture. How many people are involved? How do we make sure that the inputs are cheaper? That entire regime is highly incentivized. However, what Ugandans talk about, that tax holidays are given to foreigners, is not true. When the government is putting in place tax policies for incentives and tax holidays, they do not say this is meant to benefit the foreign investors or the local investors. The difference comes in with the thresholds that are set for one to benefit from a particular incentive, if it is based on the investment that somebody has made. As we speak now, to address that variation, if you've been following, this year and I think last year, there were specific tax holiday proposals that were put in place. However, in order to make sure that Ugandans who may not raise huge capital for investment, different thresholds were arrived at. If you are going to enjoy a 10-year tax holiday now in specific sectors, a Ugandan needs $1 million, which is about 3.7 billion shillings. However, a same person who is a foreign investor, to benefit from the same tax holiday, will need to invest $10 million. But further still, if there was a Ugandan who is involved in providing other services which do not necessarily meet those thresholds, for example, within the free zone, such a person would still benefit from that regime. So there is no tax policy that has been made purposely to benefit foreigners other than local people. The difference has been, in some instances, the thresholds that are required where Ugandans may not have been able to raise them. However, the amendment that was made last year, I've talked about introducing different thresholds for local investors and foreign investors, made a much better case where Ugandans can actually benefit.
Talking about demystifying some perceptions, Mr. Seruma, there's one last perception probably you must demystify. People say that taxes affect prices of products either coming into the country or going out of the country. There is that myth that cars that are imported from Kenya really cost, are got at a cheaper price than those that are bought here. Then there's another example in that perception that Rwanda, our neighbor, where we sell electricity, electricity is cheaper to a consumer, while here in Uganda, electricity is high. The tariffs. Does it have anything to do with taxes? Please.
Apollo, that is a very tricky one, I must admit. I am not sure whether I can answer issues to do with the electricity tariffs between Uganda and Rwanda. That's not my specialty. I'll talk about tax issues. First of all, generally, as an economist, probably you should be knowing that the matter of demand and supply is the ruler or the king in the marketplace in terms of influencing prices. Generally, demand and supply. The product you are bringing, is it on high demand? If yes, the prices will be high. Is it in short supply? Yes, the price will go up. I also do acknowledge, though, that tax is a cost that is built into when determining the price of certain commodities. In some instances, it may be there, but I can tell you largely that the real influencer of the price is not necessarily the tax. It may be an issue of transport costs. For example, now, with the COVID-19, the shipping costs, the transport costs have all gone up. That has nothing to do with the tax. The actual landing cost here will now eventually be higher, not necessarily because the tax rates have actually gone up. The tax rates may actually be low, but the other costs through the supply chain will be very high or going up. I can give you an example. Ugandans need to appreciate that in Uganda now, on the volume of imports that we get into the country, which is in the range of about maybe 22 to 25 trillion shillings, for import duty, we only collect from about 23%. The other 70% of import volumes go exempted from taxes, import duty, either because they are raw materials, they are exempted by tariff, they are exempted by schedule, or they are exempted by other protocols like the ESC, COMESA. So those, from an import point of view, will actually not even actually attract an import duty. So those are facts that we all need to appreciate. Thank you.
Vincent, we are in Tax Appreciation Month, and I must appreciate you for your time and appreciate you for your comments and, of course, the highlights you've made in this program. But lastly, Mr. Seruma, talk about briefly the activities around the Appreciation Week as we conclude.
Thank you very much, Apollo. We launched the Taxpayers Appreciation season this week, and one of the activities, as I've indicated, is we are going to profile the most compliant taxpayers at the district level, and we publish them in the Gazette and on social media. From there, we'll graduate from the 1,460, that is 10 by the 146 districts, to the topmost compliant within the regions, 50 of them. From that, we will now finally graduate to the top 15 across the country. So within this period, we are going to do that. And how do we identify them? First of all, we look for compliance, we look for effort, we look for consistency, and a number of other parameters that we look at. We will also make sure that we visit and appreciate the different taxpayers within this period. We will also provide trainings, the capacity building. You remember earlier on asked me whether we are actually looking for businesses or we want to see them die. We want to focus on carefully selected business development seminars, which will be online and webinars, and we are in the process of identifying experts who can actually build the capacity of businesses on how to survive beyond COVID. This will run per week, starting in the month of November, and then finally we'll have a grand finale in December. We'll also do corporate social responsibility in the regions to appreciate and give back to society.
Your time is out, and again, I must appreciate you for your time, and of course, for your contribution to the limelight on Salt TV this evening. And well, of course, we were talking taxation and talking about how this whole process could work well for the taxpayer and, of course, for the collector. I must congratulate you, Mr. Seruma, for, of course, around this quarter, you have collected in surplus. Congratulations once again. Well, there is Mr. Vincent Seruma, Public and Corporate Affairs at Uganda Revenue Authority. We are talking taxation issues. I must thank you so much, our viewers, and of course, I must thank our guest for this time. Limelight comes to you every Friday. We will meet again next Friday in the evening news. Good evening. My name is Simapolo, and have a good weekend.